Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 28 June 2018. Now let us begin. Now the question from Prelims of 2018 that we are analyzing today is with regards to the satellite launch vehicles of India, wherein this question had asked for the differences between PSLV and GSLV, wherein the first statement had asked what is the main purpose of PSLV and what is the main purpose of GSLV. The second statement had asked as to whether the satellites launched by PSLV are of geosynchronous or geostationary nature. And the third and the final statement had asked for the fuel cycle of GSLV. Now one of the ways to understand the satellite launch vehicles of India, or of the missile systems of India, or of the satellites of India is through a comparative format, wherein by forming a comparative format which would be based on specific purposes, basic features such as fuel cycles, and in similar terms if you try to analyze and understand the missile systems of India or the satellites of India, such as the differences between Chandrayaan-1 and Chandrayaan-2, or the differences between Agni-3, Agni-4 and Agni-5 missile, one of the effective methods of understanding it would be through a comparative format, based upon a particular feature such as fuel cycle, distance, purpose, among other forms of feature. And so now with this, let us move on to the first article for today. Now we have taken this article from page 12. Now what this article talks about is the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. Now according to the article, the depth infrastructure practices of China has allowed China a strategic control of the Hambantota port. Now with regards to this article, what we'll do is first understand the location of Hambantota port. Then we'll try to understand the depth infrastructure practices of China, especially with regards to the depth deal that this article talks about with regards to the Hambantota port. And then we'll see on how Hambantota ports forms a part of Chinese Hong Kong model of neo-colonialism, and how the Hambantota port also forms a part of Chinese string of pearls. And lastly, what we'll try to understand is the Indian response to this Chinese strategic threat. So now let us first understand about Hambantota port. And we'll start this by first understanding on how the location of the Hambantota port is of strategic importance. Now if you take a look at this map, Hambantota port lies on the southern coast of Sri Lanka, and the port of Hambantota is intended to serve ships that are traveling along the east-west shipping route. Wherein if you see in this map, the Hambantota port serves the east-west shipping route, wherein it connects the major shipping routes from Europe to Asia through the Straits of Malacca to the Suez Canal. However, irrespective of its strategic location on the east-west shipping route, the Hambantota port has handled fewer ships every year, wherein it handled around roughly 19 ships in 2015 to about 14 ships in 2016. And therefore what has been seen is that Hambantota port has not been commercially viable in the current scenario. Now hopefully up till here you have understood the important aspect of the strategic location of Hambantota port, wherein the Hambantota port is located near the east-west shipping route that connects the Malacca Straits to the Suez Canal, thereby linking Asia and Europe. But despite its strategic commercial location, the Hambantota port has progressively handled fewer ships every year. And what has been seen is that it has not been commercially viable in the current scenario. So now let us understand the background of the Chinese investment in the Hambantota port. Now Sri Lanka and China had signed the Hambantota port concession agreement in July of 2017. And it was after signing this agreement that China declared that Hambantota port will be a part of its Belt and Road Initiative. Now similarly as what the article has stated, Sri Lanka signed an agreement in December of 2017 wherein the majority stake of the Hambantota port was handed over to a state-run Chinese company. Now as per this agreement, the Hambantota port was handed over to the state-run Chinese company on a 99-year lease. Now you should keep in mind the fact about the 99-year lease, because it becomes relevant when we try to understand the Hong Kong model of neo-colonialism. And it was through these two agreements that Sri Lanka signed with China in July of 2017 and then again in December 2017 that Sri Lanka got entrapped in the Chinese debt trap. Now what happened was that China's Exim Bank or the Export-Import Bank loaned 85% of the amount for the port at a high interest rate of 6.5%. Wherein this high commercial interest rate means that it was not a soft loan that China had given to Sri Lanka, wherein soft loans generally have an interest rate of 1 to 2%. And apart from this, the rest of the 15% that Sri Lanka needed was also borrowed from other sources. However, as we understood, the Hambantota port is not handling as many ships that it is required to do. It has become commercially unviable. And because it is commercially unviable, the total estimates of Sri Lankan debt to China was roughly around 8 billion in 2017. And it was because of this huge debt of $8 billion that Sri Lanka had to sign an agreement in December of 2017 with China, wherein it had to hand over the majority stake to a state-run Chinese company. Now, the amount of money that China gave to Sri Lanka in the December 2017 agreement actually went back to China itself. Now, let's say China had given $100 to Sri Lanka for the majority stake in the Hambantota port. Then Sri Lanka had to actually give this $100 back to China to pay back the interest on the original loan that Sri Lanka had taken from China for the Hambantota port. So now hopefully up till here you've also understood the background to the Chinese control of the Hambantota port. And moreover, you also understand on how Sri Lanka got into a debt trap with Chinese loan. And moreover, you also understand on how China, as part of its financing for infrastructure projects across the world under the Belt Road Initiative, has actually had negative economic impact. Now, after understanding on how Chinese financing of infrastructure projects under the Belt Road Initiative has led to a debt trap in Sri Lanka, let us understand on how this form of debt trap of China is a form of the Hong Kong model of neocolonialism. Now, various scholars have argued that China is replicating the practices that were used against China during the Opium Wars. Now, what had happened during the Opium War is that the European powers used conditions such as the 99-year lease agreements, now wherein Britain had leased the territory of Hong Kong from China for 99 years in 1898, and the territory of Hong Kong was then returned to China in 1997. Now, what scholars have argued is that China is now establishing its own Hong Kong style of new colonial arrangements. So, if you take an example of the Hambantota port, China had signed a 99-year lease agreement, wherein under China's debt practices, Sri Lanka actually had to hand over its own port. Now, during the Opium Wars, the European powers used military, especially Britain, who used its naval strength to control China, while China is now using its economic strength, such as in the form of financing infrastructure projects under the Belt Road Initiative, and thereby making smaller countries such as Kenya, Pakistan, or Sri Lanka being trapped in a debt trap of China. And this is what has happened with the Hambantota port. And this is why scholars are calling the Hambantota port as an example of the Hong Kong model of neocolonialism. And it is only small countries with small economies such as Sri Lanka which then get trapped in such debt practices of China. And this is one of the reasons that India has given to oppose the Belt Road Initiative due to the unfair debt financing practices that China has undertaken. Now hopefully up till here you've also understood on how financing of infrastructure projects by China under the Belt Road Initiative is an example of the Hong Kong model of neocolonialism. And moreover, you also understand on how the 99-year lease agreement that Sri Lanka has signed with China is an example of the Hong Kong model of neocolonialism. Now let us understand on how Hambantota port becomes a part of China's string of pearls. Now in simple terms, string of pearls means that China is forming various ports or infrastructure around India, such as the Gwadar port in Pakistan, Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, Chittagong port in Bangladesh, Sitwe port in Myanmar, and how all of these ports are encircling India. And this encirclement, in simpler terms, is known as the string of pearls. Now the main reason that China is investing in these ports is not because it expects various commercial returns from these ports. It is because these ports have strategic value. Wherein the Gwadar port overlooks the Strait of Hormuz, the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka overlooks the east-west shipping route, the Sitwe port in Myanmar overlooks the Straits of Malacca, and in similar terms, China has also invested in various other ports across the Indian Ocean. Now this 99-year lease agreement with regards to Hambantota port, which Sri Lanka had signed with China, has raised concerns in India because it remains to be seen on how Sri Lanka will be able to maintain its absolute sovereignty over the Hambantota port, and we'll have to wait and see on whether Sri Lanka would be able to stop Chinese practices that India might consider as being anti-India, such as anchoring of Chinese military vessels, establishment of listening posts, among other anti-India measures. Now hopefully up till here you also understood as to what is China's string of pearls and how Hambantota port forms a part of this string of pearls. Now one of the concerns that we just talked about is on how Sri Lanka would be able to counter the Chinese influence in the Hambantota port, which we'll have to wait and see. And now apart from this, India has also taken a counter strategy to this growing Chinese influence through the Hambantota port. Now India has been intending to invest in the Matala Rajapaksa International Airport, which is situated near the Hambantota port. Now one of the problems with this international airport is that it is also not commercially viable. When this airport was opened in 2013 and is called the world's emptiest airport, when this airport is made to handle 1 million passengers but receives only about 12 passengers a day. Now, one of the reasons India is looking to invest within this airport is for strategic interest and not for commercial interest, wherein this airport would give India the ability to form a listening port near the Hambantota port. Now, hopefully up till here, you've also understood India's counter strategy to limit their Chinese influence in the Hambantota port. Now, let us understand as to where this article, the explanation given in this section, and this write-up that I had prepared for the January edition of the Focus magazine would be placed in your UPSC Civil Service Examination syllabus. Now this would be placed in GS paper 2 in the International Relations section, wherein firstly it would be placed in India and its neighborhood relations with regards to India and Sri Lanka and with regards to India and China. And secondly, it would also be placed in bilateral agreements with regards to the December 2017 agreement between China and Sri Lanka, which is affecting India's interest. And lastly, it would also be placed in effective policies and politics of developing countries on India's interest. Now previously questions have been asked in your UPSC mains examination paper, wherein the first question was asked in the GS paper of 2013, which had asked as to what do you understand by the string of pearls and how does the string of pearl impact India, briefly outline the steps that have been taken by India to counter the string of pearls. And the second question was asked in the GS paper of 2011, wherein the question had asked as to critically examine the security and strategic implications of the string of pearls theory. Now in similar terms, the Hambantota port and the Chinese policy of string of pearls form in another part of your UPSC syllabus, wherein it also forms a part of your GS paper 1 in the section Geography of the World, wherein previously questions have been asked, wherein both of these questions were asked in GS paper 1 of 2016. When the first question had asked, South China Sea has assumed great geopolitical significance in the present context, comment, while the second question had asked to present an account of the Indus Water Treaty and examine its various implications in the context of the changing bilateral relations between India and Pakistan. And in similar terms, Hambantota port and China's string of pearls can also be asked within the context of geography of the world, wherein if Hambantota port is asked within the context of geography of the world, then you need to emphasize its geographical aspects such as that it connects the east-west shipping route, its location, and its various other geographical aspects. And this is one of the contexts that I had emphasized in a much earlier video, wherein whenever you're studying news with regards to international relations, either in your GS mains paper or your prelims examination, understand its geographical aspect also, wherein questions that are asked on geography of the world do have a strong emphasis on current events of international importance that would be linked to that geographical aspect. So whenever you're studying Hambantota port, Gwadar port, Chabahar port, South China Sea, understand it from both the international relations perspective and from the perspective of geography of the world. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 12. Now what we need to understand from this article is the 2+1 dialogue mechanism. Now what has happened is that China has proposed of a 2+1 dialogue mechanism, wherein 2 would mean India and China and +1 would mean any South Asian country, wherein according to China, the 2+1 dialogue mechanism would not be a trilateral dialogue mechanism. And according to China, in this 2+1 dialogue mechanism, India and China would jointly conduct a dialogue with any third South Asian country. And according to this article, Nepal has agreed to this 2+1 dialogue mechanism. But you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, and we'll have to wait and see as to what would be the response of India to this Chinese proposal of a 2+1 dialogue mechanism. Now considering that the news is in transition, let us wait and see on how this news moves forward. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 1. And this article has further been continued on page 10. Now what this article talks about is that the Government of India has placed a new draft bill, which is called the Higher Education Commission of India, Repeal of Universities Grants Commission Act of 2018. And this bill has been placed in the public domain to invite suggestions from the general public. So what we'll do with regards to this article is understand about this draft bill in terms of its purpose, basic features, among other relevant information with regards to this draft bill. Now this new draft bill called the Higher Education Commission of India Repeal of Universities Grant Commission Act Bill of 2018 has been prepared by the Ministry of Human Resource and Development, and this bill has been placed in the public domain to invite comments and suggestions from the general public. Now this draft bill intends to repeal the Universities Grant Commission Act of 1951, wherein this new draft bill intends to establish a Higher Education Commission of India, and this Higher Education Commission of India would replace the current apex higher education body, which is the Universities Grants Commission. Now the reason the Higher Education Commission of India is being established is because currently the Universities Grant Commission has regulatory powers, wherein it includes both quality assessment and funding of higher education. And this new draft bill aims to separate academics and funding of higher education. So now hopefully you have understood the basic features of this draft bill, wherein the first point is that it has been prepared by the Ministry of Human Resource and Development. The second point is that the new bill intends to repeal the UGC Act of 1951. Moreover, you also understand the third point, which is that it seeks to establish a Higher Education Commission of India, wherein this Higher Education Commission of India would replace the current apex higher education regulator, which is the Universities Grant Commission. And fourthly, you understand the purpose of this bill, where it seeks to separate the powers related to academics and funding of higher education. Now let us understand the principles that have been considered during the preparation of this draft bill. Now the first principle that this bill is based upon is that it intends to have less government regulations and more governance, wherein this bill seeks to reduce the interference in the management issue of educational institutions. The second principle is that it seeks for the separation of grant functions, meaning that the grant functions, meaning funding, would be carried out by the HRD Ministry or the Ministry of Human Resource and Development, and the Higher Education Commission of India would only focus upon academic matters. Wherein currently what happens is that the UGC or the University Grants Commission has both the regulatory powers of quality assessment and funding of higher education. Now the third purpose of this bill is that it seeks to end Inspection Raj, wherein by ending Inspection Raj, it seeks to encourage merit-based decision-making with regards to standards and quality of higher education. Now the fourth principle is that it would focus on academic quality, wherein the Higher Education Commission of India would be tasked with the mandate of improving academic standards, wherein it would focus first on learning outcomes, second on evaluation of academic performance by institutions, mentoring of institutions, fourth being training of teachers, fifth being the promotion of use of educational technology, among other forms of academic standards. And apart from this, the Higher Education Commission of India would also develop norms for setting standards for opening and closure of institutions, provision for greater flexibility and autonomy to institutions, laying standards for appointments to critical leadership positions at the institutional level. Now the fifth and the last principle that has been considered while preparing this draft bill is the power to enforce, wherein the Higher Education Commission of India will have the power to grant authorization for starting of academic operations, and this authorization would be based upon the compliance with norms of academic quality, and these academic quality standards would be provided by the Higher Education Commission of India. Apart from this, the Higher Education Commission of India will also have penal powers and would be able to sanction punishment such as shutting down substandard institutions. So now hopefully up till here you've also understood the 5 principles that were undertaken while preparing the Higher Education Commission of India Bill of 2018. Now you do have to understand that this news is currently in transition, wherein we'll have to wait and see on the final form of this Higher Education Commission of India Bill of 2018. Now with regards to UPSC syllabus, it would be placed in GS paper 2 in the subsection Issues Relating to Development Management of Education. So now let us wait and see on how this bill moves forward. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 9. Now what this article talks about is the Mantri Ujwala Yojana, wherein according to this article, the Mantri Ujwala Yojana has completed 2 years in operation. So what we'll do with regards to this article is understand about Mantri Ujwala Yojana from the perspective of your prelims and mains examination. Now the Mantri Ujwala Yojana was first launched in May of 2016 with the tagline Swachh Indhan Behtar Jeevan, meaning clean fuel better life. Wherein the Pradhan Mantri Ujwala Yojana was the first social welfare scheme that has been implemented by the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Now, the original aim of the Pradhan Mantri Ujwala Yojana was to provide 5 crore LPG connections to women from below poverty line households. And these 5 crore LPG connections were required to be provided within the next 3 years, starting from 2016-17. However, in February of 2018, the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs approved to enhance the target base from 5 crore to 8 crore, and this new target of 8 crore needs to be achieved by 2020. Now, the third point with regards to the Pradhan Mantri Ujwala Yojana is that it provides a financial support of Rs 1600 for each LPG connection, and this financial support under the Pradhan Mantri Ujwala Yojana is only provided to eligible households. And it was in February 2018 that the Cabinet approved a proposal to expand the scheme to cover all SC/ST household, beneficiaries of Antyodaya Anna Yojana, beneficiaries of the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, forest dwellers, most backward classes, tribes that worked on tea gardens, among other eligible households. Now, one unique feature of this scheme is that the connection under the Pradhan Mantri Ujwala Yojana is given in the name of the woman head of the household. Now, the main aim of the Pradhan Mantri Ujwala Yojana is that it intends to replace the unclean cooking fuels in the most underprivileged households with clean and more efficient liquefied petroleum gas connections, wherein by providing efficient LPG connections, it seeks for women empowerment, which is highlighted in this article, which would have much more time to undertake other responsibilities rather than collecting unclean cooking fuel such as wood, dung, among other forms of unclean cooking fuel. Secondly, this scheme also intends to decrease the health ailments or the health problems that exist because of the use of unclean cooking fuel. So now hopefully you've understood the basic features of the Pradhan Mantri Ujwala Yojana. Now a question for practice. When the question is which of the following statement is correct with regards to the Prime Minister Ujwala Yojana? When the first statement is that Ujwala Yojana is a flagship scheme of the Ministry of Women and Child Development. The second statement is that the scheme aims to provide LPG connections to 18 crore by 2018. The third statement is that the connection under the scheme is given in the name of the woman head of the household. Now, with regards to government schemes, one thing that we had discussed earlier is that when you're studying government schemes, first understand as to who is the implementing agency, department or ministry for that particular government scheme. Then understand as to what is the purpose of that scheme. And then understand what are the unique features of that particular government scheme. When questions on government schemes in 2017 and in 2018 had mainly focused upon these three parameters. And it is within that context that you should understand that the Ujwala Yojana is a flagship scheme of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and therefore the first statement is incorrect. And moreover, you should also understand that the aim of the scheme is not to provide LPG connections to 18 crore by 2018, and therefore the second statement is also incorrect. While with regards to the third statement, is that the connection would be provided in the name of the woman head of the household, and therefore the third statement is correct, and thereby the correct answer would be C, 3 only. So now hopefully you have understood the basic features of the Pradhan Mantri Ujwala Yojana. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 11. Now what this article talks about is the UDAN Scheme. So what we'll do with regards to this article is understand about the UDAN Scheme from the perspective of your prelims examination. Now the full form of the UDAN Scheme is Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik and is part of the Civil Aviation Ministry's Regional Connectivity Scheme. Now this UDAN Scheme is a key component of the National Civil Aviation Policy, which was released by the Ministry of Civil Aviation in June of 2016. Now the implementing agency of the UDAN Scheme is the Airport Authority of India. And this UDAN Scheme would be a market-based mechanism in which airlines would bid for seat subsidies. So let's say if there's an airline A and it says that it would bid for 20 seats on a particular route, then the government would try to provide subsidy for these 20 seats. Now this UDAN Scheme is the first of its kind schemes globally that intends to create affordable airline tickets for consumers, yet still be economically viable and profitable for airlines, wherein flying on regional routes were not profitable for airlines, and therefore the price of airline tickets on such regional routes used to be very high. Now the UDAN Scheme intends to provide connectivity to unserved and underserved airports in India, and the scheme would be in operation for a period of 10 years. So under the UDAN scheme, the price of a 1 hour journey, which might be of roughly around 500 km or of 30 minutes on a helicopter, would now be capped at Rs 2500. And in similar terms, there would be proportionate pricing for different regional routes with different lengths and flight duration. So now hopefully you have understood the basic features of the UDAN scheme. Now the objectives of the UDAN scheme will be achieved through a financial stimulus that would be in the form of concessions that would be given by the central government, the state government and the airport operators. And apart from this, a viability gap funding would be provided to the interested airlines to start the operations, thereby allowing the passenger fares to be kept at affordable levels. Now the Government of India has awarded 128 routes that would connect 43 underserved or unserved airports across India. And flights under this scheme have already started from 6 airports that are under the Regional Connectivity Scheme, such as Shimla, Porbandar, Gwalior, Bhatinda, among others. So now hopefully you have understood the basic features of the UDAN scheme and also the current status of implementation of the UDAN scheme. Wherein with regards to the syllabus of the prelims examination, it would be placed in the section Economic and Social Development. And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.